Hi, welcome to Western History Alive. I'm Kim Copel, and I'm going to be your guide as we take a walk through history. Today, we're in Genoa, Nevada's oldest settlement. It was founded in 1851 as a Mormon trading post by John Reese and Stephen Kinsey. In 1855, it was given the name of Genoa by Orson Hyde. And finally, in 1975, it was declared a National Historic District. Now, simply because your building is in a National Historic District doesn't necessarily mean it shares the same status. So we're going to take a journey with this house today and find out how it became registered in the National Historic District as its own National Historic Register in its own right. Today, this is going to be the story of Genoa's historic pink house. Now, in 1851, when Colonel Reese arrived here with Stephen Kinsey, they were the first locators of this land, and he simply purchased a lot of land. He owned the land that Mormon Station is sitting on. He had the first land claim 1. He also was the fourth postmaster here in Genoa, and he built a sawmill and a grist mill right up the street on Mill Street and Genoa Street, excuse me. And he had many business dealings here. In 1855, he had a 2-story home built that was built by Mark Gage, and it was located up on Mill Street. Now, unfortunately, after all of Mr. Reese's time here and all the business dealings that he was involved in, eventually his own partner who helped him sell cattle disappeared with the money after a cattle sale. And poor John Reese was in debt into so many things that he couldn't turn his fortune around. By 1859, he did have to leave Genoa and go back to Salt Lake City. Unfortunately, also, he wasn't able to sell all of his property, and it stayed in probate for quite a long time. Now, an original pioneer merchant here in Genoa who had 2 stores was J.R. Johnson. And J.R. Johnson owned this property where we're standing now and was looking to put a home on it and bring his family out from back east. When he was able to do that in 1870, he purchased Colonel Reese's house from Mill Street. He simply had it moved down Mill Street on 2 logs and with a capstan and only 2 men helping, and he put it into place. Now, it wasn't the size of the home that you see here right now. He added on to it to make the 11 rooms that you see, and he painted it pink because in 1870, pink was a very popular color for Victorian-style homes. Now, he had this home until about 1883, and then a local lawyer by the name of Daniel Webster Virgin, who was actually a DA and a judge here, purchased the home because he had a family with 3 young children and he lived on Main Street and needed a larger home. He was a prominent judge and district attorney, so he could afford to purchase this large property. It was District Attorney Daniel Webster Virgin that was able to develop the land that we see around the home. Of course, it's not exactly like it is now, but he planted orchards and he planted a lot of vegetation. Actually, his wife was famous for her raspberry shortcakes, and on July 4th, they used to open up the ice house door around the corner and serve ice cream and her famous raspberry shortcake. Now, I was thinking it might be a good idea to head over to the Courthouse Museum at this time to learn more about the Virgin family. Today, we're in Genoa, Nevada's first settlement, settled in 1851 as a trading post by John Reese and Stephen Kinsey. By 1855, Orson Hyde had given the trading post the name of Genoa because by then it was a town. And in 1975, this town reached the status of a National Historic District. However, that being said, doesn't mean that every building within the district shares that status on its own. Today is the story of a home's journey to reach its own National Historic District status. This is the story of Genoa's historic pink house. Now, there was an original pioneer merchant who came in the 1860s, about 1863. His name was J.R. Johnson, and he had 2 stores on Main Street. He was in business with Noah Blossom. Now, he had the entire corner of what is now Main Street and Genoa Lane, but he didn't have a home on that property. So by 1870, when Colonel Reese's house, which was a 2-story Gothic Victorian built by Mark Gage up on Mill Street next to the mills, he was able to purchase that home, and he moved it down to his property with an amazing process of only 2 men, some log rollers, and a capstan. He put the home into place, added on to it to eventually make 11 rooms, and painted the house pink, because in 1870 that was a popular color for Victorian homes. Then he was able to bring his family from back east out here to live with him. Now, he lived in the home until about 1883, and then it was time for him to sell it. And he was able to sell it to a local prominent judge and district attorney named Daniel Webster Virgin. Daniel Webster Virgin himself was married and had 3 small children, and was living in a small home on Main Street next to his office. He moved over to the home, and he was basically responsible for developing the house's grounds. Well, he was an orchardist, so he planted several fruit trees. He also planted a lot of vegetables and berries, while his wife was known for her raspberry shortcake. And every 4th of July, they would open up the ice house, serve ice cream, and also her raspberry shortcake. The 3 children grew up in the home, and eventually when Mr. Virgin retired, his own daughter was the person who kind of did the running around for him business-wise. There are people who have written in books that they remember daily seeing carriages and horses lined up in front of his house while they came to visit him just for his advice, people from all over Carson Valley. Now, I wanted to be here in the museum, the Courthouse Museum in Genoa, to share the Virgin family's story with you, because they owned the house for the longest and had the biggest influence on the pink house. So here we are in the courtroom of the Genoa Courthouse Museum. And actually, we call it the Courthouse Museum Genoa because it is operated by the Douglas County Historical Society. The portraits that you see on the wall are of Daniel Webster Virgin and his wife, Mary Raycraft Virgin. The Raycrafts came here in 1860 from back east. They came across the plains, settled here in Genoa, and started and bought a hotel and had a carriage, a hotel business. They were ranchers. They also had a stage business here. And Daniel Webster Virgin, when he came here in 1863, he was a bachelor. He was a new lawyer. He didn't strike it rich in the gold country. So he rented some space at the Raycraft Hotel's depot house and started a business. He purchased a house on Main Street from Jerome Thorington, whose father was hung earlier, a few years earlier, under suspicious occasions. And he got acquainted with the family. In 1859, he married Mary Raycraft, and they started a family and had 3 children. He alternated between being a judge for several years and a district attorney. He was involved in many social aspects of the town of Genoa. He was one of the charter members of the Masonic organization here in Nevada. He was also an Odd Fellow for several years. He belonged to the Nevada Bar, and he was a Republican. Now, when he moved over to the Pink House, he had 2 daughters and a son. William was named after Judge Virgin's father, and their oldest daughter, Ellen, was named after Mary's mother. And then they had a younger daughter, Lily. Now, when they moved over to the Pink House and raised their family in the Pink House, their daughter Ellen was known as a musician around the Carson Valley. And eventually she had an accident in one of the wagons that she was traveling to performance, and never married, and she lived quite a few years being incapacitated. Their son was never married either, and he passed away in 1930, but Lillian was the only one to marry. And so what I'd like to share with you today is the story of Lillian Virgin and her influence on one of the biggest fundraisers here in Genoa. So why don't you follow me to the next exhibit where we will meet Lillian Virgin Finnegan. Well, here we are in another exhibit room at the Courthouse Museum in Genoa, where Judge Virgin actually was the first judge to sit on the bench here. This room is the parlor exhibit. When it was a courthouse, it would have been the jury deliberation room, but the reason for this room is to give our guests an idea of what a parlor would have looked like during the Victorian times. And while the furniture here in this parlor did not come from the Pink House, it is very similar to the furniture that would have been in the Pink House. There is an item here in the parlor that did come from the Pink House, however, and it is the lace curtains that you see in the 3 windows over there. Now, one of the reasons I wanted to bring you into this room to share a very special story of a very special woman that was very influential on the town of Genoa. Not only was she her father's right-hand man in 1926, after her mother had passed away and her husband Louis Finnegan had passed away, she moved back in with her father to help him out, but in her own right she had been a teacher and she had been a suffragette. Her name is Lillian Virgin Finnegan. She was probably one of the most organized women here in Carson Valley. People would come to her in this town to organize events to raise money. One of the most famous events that she helped to raise money for and gave the concept to was Genoa's annual candy dance. Now in 1919, Genoa had the experience of having electricity in town, but they didn't have street lights. And everybody was wanting street lights, but just like today in Genoa, in order to have anything done, we have to have a fundraiser because we don't get a lot of money from the county or taxes. We're just a very small town. So Lillian, when her husband was alive, they had been on a riverboat cruise, and there was a dance where they served homemade candy, which was basically considered a delicacy. So she got together with her Aunt Jane Raycraft Campbell, and they came up with the idea of having a midnight supper at the Raycraft Hotel, all of the women in town making handmade candy, and passing it out at a dinner dance across the street at the Raycraft Dance Hall. It was such a success, they were able to purchase 3 streetlights that year. When they thought about it, though, they had to have a way to not only purchase more streetlights, but keep the streetlights lit each year. So what Lillian did was she spearheaded this event to happen each year, and it has since 1919 without fail. So to this year, we will be having the candy dance the last full weekend in September. It's now a 2-day event. It went to a 2-day craft fair event in the 1970s. And now there still is a dinner dance, but you can come to Genoa and experience a lot of handmade crafts and a lot of fun and a lot of people on that day. So don't miss this event if you can help it this year. Now, Lillian Virgin Finnegan lived until she was 60 years old. Her father passed away in 1928, and she passed away in 1938. The romance of the Pink House doesn't end with the Virgins, however, because in 1928, on the August day of Judge Virgin's funeral, there was a couple in town on their own honeymoon visiting some friends, and they stood on Main Street and spied the Pink House just across the street, and they dreamed of what it would be like to own that special house. Little did they know that 11 years later, they would be purchasing the Pink House from Lillian Virgin's estate in 1938. Now, they owned the house for several years until one day when Percy passed away. This was Agnes and Percy Train. When Percy passed away, Mrs. Train brought her parents out from back east to live with her. Now, she remarried, and she got married in the garden of the Pink House, just like Lillian Virgin Finnegan did. And eventually, she and her new husband moved to California, so her parents remained in the house for several years until her father passed away. At that point, she decided it was time to sell the property, and this was 1956. From 1956 until today, there have been several property owners of the Pink House. It was in the late 60s that it became a commercial property. For the last decade plus, the gentleman that owns the property for the Pink House has spent a lot of time trying to help people understand the wonderful history of the Pink House. He spent a good portion, almost a decade of these years, working to get the Pink House on the Register of the National Historic, let me say that again, to get on the Register of National Historic Places. It was a long, hard haul because many of you might know if a house has been moved or it has been renovated in any manner, usually you cannot get that status. But he was able to prove to the committee through much historic documentation the importance of this home in the beginning of what was to become the state of Nevada. Orson Hyde, John Reese, and many of the government officials that started the town of Genoa met in the parlor of Colonel Reese's home when it was up on Mill Street. The house's architecture, which is originally Gothic revival, was added onto, but not in a way to distort the architecture, but to enhance it and bring it into the Queen Anne era. So these 2 points, along with several others, helped the committee to decide that, yes, indeed, this home was significant enough to place on the Register of National Historic Places. And again, not every building within this district enjoys that status. I'd like to expand upon what we were talking about before about the courthouse here. This is the Courthouse Museum in Genoa, and it is the oldest courthouse in the state of Nevada. It was built in 1865, and it lasted as a courthouse until 1915 when the county seat was moved. But during the time that it was a courthouse, when Judge Virgin was actually the first judge to sit on the bench here, it saw many cases in this courtroom. There were water rights issues, divorces, murders, the average thievery and burglary. There was all kinds of lively cases that were heard here. Here in the Courthouse Museum, we have been able to turn it back into what it looked like when it was a courthouse. It's had 3 lives. After 1915, it sat vacant for about a year, and then it was sold to the school district for about $150. And there was a 1-room schoolhouse up 5th Street that was overflowing at the time, and they desperately needed an elementary school. So this courthouse became an elementary school in 1916, and for the next 40 years, children ran through the walls here and learned all of the things that they needed to get them going in the world. And it was a very comfortable place with a lot of fond memories. There's people that will come through the door today that have memories of being a student here when it was a school. Now, after the school district was realigned and there was no more school being held here in Genoa, it was 1956 when they moved the school over to Gardnerville and Minden. And this courthouse actually sat vacant for over 10 years until the Carson Valley Historical Society, which is now known as the Douglas County Historical Society, acquired it and renovated it and restored it to what it looked like when it was a courthouse. So when you visit the Courthouse Museum today, you will be able to see 3 original rooms that were the way they were when it was a courthouse. You'll get to see the courtroom that we're standing in right now. You will also get to see the jail, and you'll see the recorder's office downstairs. The other rooms portray the history of Carson Valley and Genoa. For instance, did you know that the Pony Express ran right down the street here, and the Immigrant Trail ran right in front of where the courthouse is now? You will get to see rooms that tell you that history. Also, there's the Snowshoe Thompson room. Snowshoe Thompson, who was the mailman of the Sierra and carried the mail between Placerville and Genoa for 20 years. He was a prominent citizen here in the valley. When he passed away, his own funeral was held here in the courthouse. So the Courthouse Museum here in Genoa is a wonderful way to experience the history of Genoa and Carson Valley. If you would like to learn more history about Genoa, why not visit the Courthouse Museum here in Genoa? It's a seasonal museum that's open May through October. It's open every day of the week, but with the hours that you need to be able to visit, you might want to give them a call to make sure they're open. The number is 775-782-4325. And if you'd like a historic tour of Genoa, why not give me a call at 775-220-0605. If you have an idea for a show or would like to be a guest or would like to receive the Western History Alive newsletter, you can contact me by 775-220-0605 or at info@Genoa Historic Ghost Tours. History is made every moment, every hour, and every day by every one of us. Make our history count. Keep it alive. Thank you for joining me today here in Genoa. And until next time, when we get to see each other again on Western History Alive.